it makes me feel like don't do it. Would be my reaction.
I don't want it.
I don't want it.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to SnarkSquad Pod, the media podcast where we analyze the merry band of people we care about. My name is Nicole Sweeney.
I am Marines.
And we are joined again by SnarkSquad Pod regular,
Sari Riley. Hello. I'm here again.
Plot twist, we never left the room.
Yep. I've been here all along.
By which we mean a whole week. We've been here a whole week.
Yes, we just live here now in the podcast studio in the basement of our workplace. Yeah, in case you haven't heard previous episodes with me, I work for SciShow. I did Crash Course Film, and I work as an editorial assistant on the comic Monstrous. And I like media and talking about it because it's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like being able to be here and talk about it with cool people.
So this is like kind of a part 2 episode, basically. We have been in this basement all week because last episode we talked about Avatar: The Last Airbender, the Nickelodeon cartoon, and this week we are talking about the 2010 M. Night Shyamalan film adaptation, The Last Airbender.
Boo. I felt like that was needed there.
Can you hear like our sighs of exhaustion?
Yeah, we're all a little tired, again, because we haven't been home in a week, but also because we're now talking about this sad live-action film. I guess I'm getting ahead of myself, because first, Sari, give a summary of it. Give us another plot synopsis.
Can you just like cut and paste my other audio and put it in? So The Last Airbender is a movie that is based on the first third of Avatar: The Last Airbender, the animated series. So the premise is there's a world in which there are people called benders who have mastery over 4 different elements. There's fire, earth, air, and water. And the world lived in harmony, but then the Fire Nation attacked, which is the only phrase I really remember from the intro, despite listening to it 61 times. There is one person who is born, reincarnated across generations, who is born to each nation in succession. So in this case, it's an airbender named Aang, or in the movie, Ong, who is the Avatar.
Or in the movie, Avatar.
The Avatar.
The Avatar.
All vowels will be replaced with aw sounds.
Yeah. There's no normal pronunciations. But anyway, the Avatar or Avatar can control all 4 elements. And so Aang was raised as an airbender, but has the potential to learn waterbending, firebending, and earthbending. The course of this film is basically 2 members of the water tribe, Sokka, or Sokka, and his sister Katara, discover Aang underneath the ice. They were just exploring or going hunting or something like that, found a glowing mass under the ice, cracked it open, and discovered Aang and his sky bison, Appa, who's grotesquely 3D animated in this, no longer cute and fluffy. And upon realizing that he is the Avatar, go on a quest with him to help save the world and fight against the Fire Nation that has taken over. The main antagonist is still Zuko, Prince Zuko, who is the Fire Lord's son, and he was sent out into the world with his uncle Iroh to capture the Avatar. And in the movie, he just explicitly says, to restore my honor, but doesn't give it any explanation really beyond that. Presumably because once the Avatar is contained or captured, then the Fire Nation has unlimited power over the rest of the world. And the main arc of this movie is Aang making it to the Northern Water Tribe so that he can learn waterbending. while the Fire Nation is trying to attack the Northern Water Tribe because fire and water are opposite elements, and the Northern Water Tribe are powerful waterbenders. And the Fire Nation realized that if they destroy the moon spirit, and the moon is a source of waterbending power in this universe, then they can take away the waterbending nation's power and have more complete control over the world. And so they go on various journeys, and it accumulates with a final battle at this Northern Water Tribe's home base. And Aang masters waterbending enough. He feels comfortable in his power to there's this big battle. He drives away the Fire Nation by summoning up the ocean into this giant tidal wave and scares them away. And the movie just kind of ends there with him accepting this new powerful water power that he has.
Well, they tease
yes.
the next movie is basically how it ends too, because it's clearly intended to be a trilogy.
Yes.
And thankfully it's not, which I guess I'm cheating. I don't think there's any secret here, but real quick, did you like this movie?
All the joy that Avatar: The Last Airbender, the animated series, gave me, this movie just stripped it away and made me so sad and not even angry at moments, but mostly just sad and disappointed.
I watched the movie after I binge watched the series, so I guess it would have been already out. So I watched the series probably around 2010 or 2011, and I went into the movie knowing that I should not watch it, knowing that it was not going to be a good experience. But I loved Avatar: The Last Airbender so much that I was even if it's kind of sucky, I love the source material so much, I want to see the adaptation. Immediately regretted that decision. It was not worth it, even if you love the source material. So no, it was not a good time when I first watched it, and it was not a good time rewatching it for this podcast.
I watched it when it came out in the theaters. I went to go see it with my family, again, because my siblings loved the show so much, and I didn't have any context for the show, but I remember watching it. I dimly remember my siblings not liking it, them being upset about it for some reason or another, but sort of, it was a forgettable experience as a movie. I vaguely remembered the last battle, so I knew going into it for the podcast that it was going to track with the first season, because I remembered that it I had sort of a vague memory of that whole ice showdown thing. But yeah, I did not enjoy this. As Sari said, it just all of the joy, it just sucked it out of it. I think what you just said about how trying to enjoy it just from the perspective of oh, you love this show, so maybe you can get something out of it, even if it's not that great. It's interesting to me because I think that I honestly wish they would have taken more liberties with this movie. I think that, I don't know, I feel most of this conversation is ultimately going to be because we all did not like this show or this movie. We loved the show, did not like this movie. I think a lot of this conversation is going to be kind of around all of the ways in which it got stuff wrong and how could you have fixed it? I have previously articulated on this podcast my very strong feeling that you should judge an adaptation on its own merits. What is it doing on its own? And this failed as a movie on its own. It is not a good movie. Independent of whether or not it is a good adaptation, it is not a good movie. And a big part of why it is not a good movie, Mari mentioned this in the last episode, is that they stripped down all of the character development and just had a series of action sequences. Sari and I watched the movie together, and when we finished watching it, it was it felt very much like they watched the first season and found a cool moment in every episode, and we're okay, we gotta have that one cool visual moment from every episode, and but there was no the story, there was no telling or like showing of a story. There were a lot of like weird speeches from Ong as he went from town to town rescuing people. And it was just one of the things that frustrated me most of all was that you had him emerge from the ice and like he's goofy little kid, I guess, but also like one of the first things he does is go like, you know, rescue this village and give this big speech about how the Avatar has returned and now you can rise up. And like it was just very out of place. Like he doesn't go on any journey because he immediately is like, yep, I'm the Avatar and I'm here. But there's this whole thing at the end where like one of the final moments after he saves the Northern Water Tribe, like everyone, Fire Nation included, bows to him, which was interesting. And like that is seated about, 75% of the way through the movie, when he gets caught just before he gets caught by the Fire Nation, there is this moment where he is at he's at an air temple and he is talking to a monk who is at this air temple and he's telling this monk about how before he ran away, there was this moment where everyone bowed to him to accept him as the Avatar, and rather than he was supposed to bow back and he didn't, and instead he ran away. And so they set that up so that then, you know, you have this scene where everyone bows and then he bows back to say that like he has accepted his role as the Avatar. And like that is supposed to be the big culmination of the story. But like this movie does not tell that story. Like the story leading up to that should have been then Ong grappling with whether or not he wants to be the fucking Avatar. But because he like emerges from the ice almost immediately ready to like take on the job and like, you know, gives fancy speeches to villagers or whatever, it completely undercuts any ability to do that at the end. Like and that whole thing with the bowing like is an invention of the movie. Like that's not a thing from the show, and it's fine. Like I don't object to that. I think that could have been a good way to tell this story. But like that's not the story that they told, and yet they have this big visual moment that's supposed to be the big satisfying conclusion. But like it's the satisfying conclusion to a different story than the one that they actually told. So, yeah, I don't know. That's my starting point. I have so much more rage, but
in my brain, in my thinky thoughts, I know that you can judge an adaptation apart from its source material, and that you can talk about how the adaptation succeeds or fails as a work of its own. And again, Nicole said, we've talked about how important that is and how doable it is, but I've come to accept that I am very bad at it. I'm very bad at it. And you need only listen to like our Wrinkle in Time podcast and our A Game of Thrones to realize that I am very, very bad at it. So I struggled at the end of this to really think about how the movie just failed on its own and not, you know, apart from how it failed as an adaptation, especially because I was surprised after watching it that it is a rather faithful adaptation of the source material. I was surprised by how closely in some regards it tracked with the first season, but it did a lot of that like picking and choosing moments that didn't give thought to how they played out into this new medium. It was just kind of picking these things that the movie thought was key without giving thought to the storyline. And I'm almost impressed by the way that it took such a rich world, fully developed characters, you know, this entire fully fleshed out arc in one contained little arc, and it seemed to strip everything good out of it. So, even though you hit a lot of the same notes or track through the same kind of progress, it just stripped all the good parts away. And I'm excited to talk a little bit about how it did that, because I'm not entirely sure.
I think that's like the crux of my frustration with it, is that it is such an unthoughtful adaptation. It just feels like they cut and paste scenes from it. And a lot of our conversation in the previous episode about what made the last Avatar, The Last Airbender, the animated series, so good is the character work that it did. And I think in the cutting and pasting, we lost all through lines of characters. Or I felt that way, at least, where people felt really inconsistent. We didn't spend enough time with them because they were too busy bending and fighting and giving speeches without actually talking with each other and growing and making decisions. And obviously, like, the pacing has to be different when you have 20 episodes to handle something and a 2-hour movie. One hour, whatever, 40 minutes, whatever it was. But yeah, that was the thing that felt like it got cut out as they were pasting things together, was like the actual character growth. And the things that I loved the most about the series was that I loved all these people and I cared about them. And I didn't care about anyone from the first scene. Sokka and Katara were understandably, like, you can't be as exaggerated and you can't be as intense characters as you are in a cartoon, maybe. But it was like, Sokka wasn't funny in the first 10 minutes of this, and that was like a defining characteristic of him in the cartoon. And so I wouldn't have minded if you adapted it and you changed his character in a meaningful way, but it just felt like everything was washed out. And whitewashed. Haha.
Woo.
Yep.
I mean, okay, yeah. So like that is whitewashing. Let's go there. That's I think that is a necessary piece of this conversation. So a fun fact that I learned from another podcast that Sari actually recommended to me called Fansplaining, which if you like this podcast, you probably will enjoy Fansplaining. It is like two like academic types talking about fanish stuff. It's very cool. But apparently like the whole term race bending is like born out of the fan backlash to this movie, that like there was like a very organized sort of fan campaign when the casting for this movie was announced. And so like element bending, race, like that was sort of what, I mean, like the idea of race bending wasn't obviously like a character, like whatever, X bending characters, like that concept existed obviously, but like that particular terminology is born out of like fans reacting to the whitewashing of this cast. The original Zuko like step down, or I forget the particulars of this. I looked this up and then forgot and don't have it right in front of me. But the original Zuko either backed out or like whatever and was replaced by Dev Patel. So there's a major character who is not white, but of course he's the villain. So you have white people and the villain.
He's the villain and he still has a like Chinese name, like which was weird to me, and I didn't realize it was weird until afterward. It's like, it's still Zuko and Iroh, which are very not Indian names, right, despite making the Fire Nation an Indian nation.
Yeah.
Which was weird, but continue. Yeah.
I mean, no, that's about it. Like it did not make any kind of sense. And it was frustrating too, because you keep seeing all of these characters, Aang, Ong and Sokka and Katara, all fucking white. But they're situated amongst like non-white people. Like the flashbacks that we get of Ong being trained, he's like everyone else, he's the only white person in that flashback. So what are you doing? And I didn't get a very good look at the Southern Water Tribe, but I believe like their grandma was also white, but I don't think that the rest of the village was white either.
I don't think so either.
Like what are you doing? Why? Sokka and Katara upset me more, like most of all, because like the cartoon, like they're literally like brown, like yeah, the cartoon. Like I don't understand how you leap to that, I don't know. Like it's just very frustrating. Why?
Within 5 seconds of hearing Ong the Avatar like on my screen, which I for some reason blocked from the first time that I watched it, but there was a line that Katara actually says Ong, or the Avatar Ong, or like really closely together, and it was just like making my ear bleed. So I made the grave mistake of Googling why did they change the pronunciations for the movie. And I came across a string of interviews with M. Night Shyamalan, which I don't recommend reading any interviews with M. Night Shyamalan about this movie because it will just make you angrier. And I think that, you know, he defends, in the interview that I read, I don't know if since then he's said anything else about it, but he defends his casting choices and the whitewashing because of the way that they're drawn. And it's kind of, you know, the facial features in the cartoon anime style are kind of open to interpretation, according to him, even though the setting and everything else is obviously very Asian inspired. So that's kind of his piece on that. But I think what made me the angriest is this idea that he corrects, according to him, the pronunciations of the names to be more like what they would be, but then he whitewashes the characters. Like, you did both those things. You're saying you're going to correct the pronunciation but make all of the heroes white. Like, those two ideas made me so furious at this movie, and I literally had only watched 5 to 10 minutes. I was like, why? Why did I do this to myself? Google after. What a newbie mistake. Like, it was awful.
Yeah. And just hearing that, like, I didn't Google it afterward, probably for my sanity. But hearing that, my blood is boiling. Just like the way that you were describing the interview made it seem like he was making a culturally sensitive choice when this is just like a slap to the face of how deliberate and careful and like honoring Asian cultures the show was. This is like a slap to the face to all that. And the fact that he decided to change the pronunciations of the names feels even more so. I think when we were watching the movie, I was saying to Nicole that it almost felt like when a substitute teacher is reading a like an Asian name or something like that, and they can't quite pronounce it, so they add like a weird. So instead of just saying
like
it's
an affectation, like it sounds like an
right.
affectation.
Yeah, so it's a Sokka, sit. Like you iterate through a couple of them, and then you stick with one. So it's like you can't just say Aang, like the TV show established as canon. It's like, oh no, it's Ong, the exotic avatar, which just feels very like exotifying. I don't know if that's the right word, but othering.
It's very
othering. Yeah.
Yes. I think the thing that made me the second angriest about the whitewashing is that the villains, the Fire Nation as a whole, I think were pretty much the brown aggressors in this. They are the darker skinned ones that we see the most of, except for Iroh. He is not. He is also lighter skinned, and he is the most sympathetic of the villains. So even the most sympathetic villain gets whitewashed like that. I don't know. That whole dynamic was just really, really, really upsetting. And had they been, not that this would make it better at all, but had they been whitewashed and like amazing actors, I feel like detractors could be like, but look at the performance that these people gave. But it wasn't even that. I don't even know why these people were cast. It wasn't even that there was some skill or something that was an excuse there. You know, they were just bad performers, bad actors.
I would push back against bad performers and bad actors. I think, well, first of all, I think Dev Patel did a great job with the little that he was asked to do. The script is just bad. Like, I think it is not entirely fair to put this on the actors. Like, I don't feel like they were asked to do any more than what they did. So I don't know. I'm reluctant to say that the weakness here is about shitty acting when like the story wasn't there. There was no, like they weren't given the dialogue. All of Aang's lines were just like
awful.
Campy and just awful. I think probably that kid was like the weakest link. He was probably the one that I'm like, acting wise, like actually underperformed. maybe could have done better. But like everybody else, it was just like there wasn't anything there for you to do. Mm-hmm. Like there was none of these characters had like real motivations. It was just a string of flashy scenes and like flashy moment to flashy moment. And I don't know. None of these actors should have been cast in the first place, but I disagree that they were bad at it. I don't think they were asked to do anything better.
I'm sticking with it. I know that the dialogue was bad, the story was bad, and I agree. And it's hard to kind of divide that out and say what portion of it was the bad dialogue, what portion was the bad story, what portion was bad acting. But I'm sticking with it because it wasn't just like it was wooden and there was no charisma there. There wasn't even something you could say like, oh, a little spark, even though that line sucked. To me, it was all very wooden, and that came from the actors. And again, so I don't know how to divide that out and say how much was the fault of the story that they were given, but I don't think they did much with what they were given anyway. So I'm sticking with it.
I think we come down to like the same ultimate place of like there was nothing, none of these performances were really jumping out as like phenomenal. Who's to blame? We disagree, but like yes, ultimately there was nothing to write home about in any of these performances, regardless of who we're going to fault.
It's almost impressive to me that you can say here that part of what is to blame that I think we both agree on was the dialogue. And we mentioned Ong's dialogue in particular. But And the dialogue was super charming in the show, but there were moments that were not bad, but some of the episodes were known to end on like, ha 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 ha, that's a good one, Katara. So it's not even like the most brilliant dialogue that you could come across, but it was sweet and it was charming, and somehow they just took all of that good stuff away and made it even worse. I think probably the dialogue was one of the most painful things to experience, especially because they did so much speechifying and expositing.
Yes. All of the dialogue was just like, it was a bunch of like very absurd, exposition, like didn't make any sense. Zuko, there's that scene where Zuko and Iroh are in, I don't even remember where the hell they are, but like Zuko like calls over this little boy to like give his backstory. Like, what the fuck? Why is this happening?
Hey kid, come here.
I need you to tell me about my own like life so that the audience can hear this information. And also like in all of the absurd I mentioned at the beginning, like my great frustration with their failure to tell the like coming of age and accepting his chosen one journey story with Aang, but like all of his speechifying after he saved the villages, like in conjunction with the whitewashing of the core cast, it like compounded to make that even worse and make it this like very gross white savior thing that like this 11-year-old white boy has just come into your village and like rescued you and whatever. It was just, he's here to give you a condescending, stupid speech. Like, And
on top of that, the moment that we both hated was when Yue, I think her name is, the moon child of the Northern Water Kingdom, has to, in the show, she makes the decision, like the moon spirit has been killed by one of the Fire Nation's generals, and the whole premise is that she was saved by the moon as a child. She was basically stillborn, and the moon breathed life into her.
Her exposition in the movie was not bad. Like that, it was info dumpy, but like they got to it in a way that that little conversation with her and Sokka, like, okay, sure.
Fine.
Cool.
It was in there.
That was like the one bit, like Sarah and I stopped to talk about it because we're like, oh, that one was effective. That was the first one in the entire movie.
Mm-hmm. But the mansplaining moment of the film was when in the show she makes the decision she tells Sokka, I was like, the moon gave me life, I can give the moon life back, and makes the choice to walk into the water, give her spirit back to this koi that was killed, and give herself back to the spirit realm. In the movie, Iroh comes in, and he was there fighting the general, and tells her, it basically explains her own destiny to her. Like, this is a thing that you can do because you were imbued with this moon spirit. So now, child, walk into the water and give your life back.
I'm so angry all over again just hearing you describe it.
And it not only is an explanation that is unnecessary coming from another character, but it rips away her agency in a way that is so frustrating that...
Why? And like,
Why?
You could have, like, that same line, you could have explained it, like, done all of that, just had her fucking say it.
Right.
Like, I can do this. Like, why? Why?
Yep.
Similarly, when Aang is giving the speech to the Earthbenders about, like, you guys can do it, you can free yourself. I got super angry there because, I mean, not only was it like the whitewashing and like this little kid now being the white savior, but in the series, and I'm sorry, this is talking about it as an adaptation, but it's Katara who motivates the people. Like, nobody else wants to do this. She makes a decision to infiltrate this camp and to, even when nobody is listening, like, she keeps trying to motivate them. And that is such a defining moment for her as, you know, one of the main female leads of the show. And they take that from her and they give it to Aang. And I was just so upset at that moment as well, because now we have like these two moments that are very important for female characters in this movie. And they're both ripped away and given to a male counterpart.
I hard agree with that. I think reducing Sokka and Katara, like, I think, like, ultimately the story that they were trying to tell is Aang and Zuko's story. And so, like, backgrounding Sokka and Katara more, like, makes sense to me. But I ultimately, like, come back to, I agree with that frustration that, like, why did they give this to Aang? It didn't even matter. Like, it didn't serve Aang any purpose either. Like, they didn't, like, they took this thing away from Katara that, like, was this big moment for her that she no longer gets to have, and they gave it to Aang, but, like, to what fucking purpose? To what end? What did that serve? What did it even do? Like, I could forgive it. I guess this is what I'm trying to say, is that I could forgive them that, because I think that backgrounding them more is, like, part of how you streamline this particular story. But I can't forgive them that, because ultimately they didn't make that change in a way that felt like it served any real purpose. And in fact, like, if Aang were struggling to come to terms with being the Avatar, it would have made sense for Katara to be the one to give that speech and, like, whatever, and have him still be like, oh, I don't know, and whatever. I like, can't form coherent sentences talking about this because I'm so angry about it.
Yeah, there are just so many choices that felt like they did so much more harm by whether or not these choices were intentional or just like, we gotta bridge the gap between a bunch of things, or we're adapting this and have to make little changes because we cast Dev Patel as Zuko, so now the Fire Nation has to be Indian. It's just like all these little things that stack up, and all the things that made sense within the context of the animated series. Like, the whole idea of Zuko's honor is, I don't want to I like know some Asian history and I don't want to like overstep my bounds. So that's my caveat. But I feel like the idea of Zuko feeling honor bound to his father and that whole part of his journey is inherently linked to like Chinese, Japanese influences of history, like very East Asian history. And the fact that it was dropped out really flippantly, like, he has to go find the Avatar to restore his honor. And like, that's the whole thing with the Fire Nation's hair being a really big thing. Like, that is a symbol of royalty. That is when it's a big deal when Iroh and Zuko cut off their hair because they're revoking their royal blood and things like that. And so like keeping that element of Zuko's motivation, but not backing it up with character development, not backing it up with choices that set him up as a good antagonist to Aang or Ong. It just
Drink every time you say Aang
every
or
time.
Ong. Every
Please
time.
do. That would have made the movie more enjoyable. Yeah, it just felt like I can't form coherent sentences either. There are so many things that they could have done to set up the Ong/Aang Zuko dynamic in this movie to do it well. But even the choices that they made to try and set that up ended up falling way, way, way flat or removing like, I don't know, detracting from everything else in a really frustrating, annoying way.
The one thing that I think this movie did well, I have one.
Wow.
I guess. I think that the set department and the costume department, less the costume department, they had some hits and misses. The set department did a really lovely job of constructing these places from the world. And there were a lot of really cool and interesting effects, like the way that they represented the bending was also visually very cool. The effects department also had some very strong hits and misses. There was a lot of really bad compositing as well. So, and of course, there's the fact that both Appa and Momo stopped being cute and became gross and scary. So
kind of terrifying,
yeah, they were terrifying looking. So again, like hits and misses with the VFX department, but like they did a very good job of the bending. The bending I thought looked very cool. That was represented well, and the set department did a very good job of constructing these scenes.
Well, that was one of the most effective and felt like most deliberate choices in the movie was Aang's water bending journey, in that there were several times when he was trying to practice waterbending. I think first time with Katara, and then with the waterbending master at the Northern Temple, and finally in the final battle, where the first two times he was struggling because he was trying to control his powers in small ways and make the water move and control small droplets, but in the background, huge waves were swelling up, and then he got nervous about the extent of his own power. That happened again during his other training, and he just would stop bending, and eventually he embraced that power and used it to save the Northern Water Tribe to form that tidal wave, and just like fully leaned into his avatar abilities, and which would have been really powerful and good if you set up that in the story, with the rest of his journey and the rest of his personal grappling.
So frustrating.
And so it was really frustrating, because that could have been a really powerful, good moment, and I could see what they were trying to do, and it felt like they were actually trying to do something with that, but it fell flat in the context of all the other problems with this movie.
Yeah. Well, because like there was a thing that they were doing, and like they built that very well with those visual effects, but they did not tell that story. Like they were not otherwise, like the narrative, that script didn't tell that story. So like, yeah, like cool, but it's not there.
Yeah.
I think my favorite part were the first 15 seconds where they recreated the credit series. In like, it was like
live action.
Live action credit. I was like, yeah, and that was it. That's my one positive.
But then they didn't even do the voiceover. I was waiting for Katara's voiceover for it, and then instead it was like this title crawl thing explaining the history of the world. It's like, no, just give me earth, air, fire, water.
Everything changed when the Fire Nation attacked. Yep. Yeah. So now that we've all named our one thing, the only other thing that I have written down to discuss, I have in big letters, it's the biggest thing that I wrote down, Zoomy Eye Fireman. And it took me a second to figure out what that meant. But they introduced the idea that like for the firebenders, the like highest achievement is being able to create fire yourself. And there's a moment in like when they're in by the moon and ocean spirits where Iroh like does that, like generates fire, but like they seed it with this really obnoxious and like campy like zoom into his eyes, like super quick zoom into his eyes, and then they zoom back out before he generates fire, and it is the silliest fucking thing. Like we burst out laughing watching it, like, and it's supposed to be this big dramatic moment, and it's just like silly and absurd and doesn't fit with the rest of this movie that they had. So yeah, Zoomy Eye Fireman is another thing I did not like. Or I don't know, maybe I did. I laughed. I guess it made me happy. It brought me some amount of joy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem is like the moments that I feel like we were supposed to laugh, like when Appa smacked Sokka down with his tail and Sokka was like, or Sokka was like, I'm being eaten by this thing. That would have been played off as funny in the show maybe, but it was just uncomfortable in the movie.
Yeah. In part because Appa was like creepy looking.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Maybe he is. Like, I don't know what kind of gruesome, like, dark twist on the story you're doing. Because, like, at this point in time, it's early enough that it's not, like, seeded well. And since Sokka hasn't done anything goofy yet, like, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. And so it's so disappointing and frustrating and blah that the funny moments are weird filmmaking choices, not even, and what is maybe a dramatic moment and would have made me actually feel something. And I remember feeling something. I remember feeling really sad for Sokka and Yue and when they had their whole relationship thing in the show, like young love, whatever, very meaningful. She's sacrificing herself. Self-sacrifice stories always get me. But in the film, it was just like this bizarro universe of bad, I don't know, people talking over other people and Iroh making a bunch of decisions and being this all-powerful being, but I didn't care because, I don't know, feelings. It was all not the best. And I've lost coherent media analysis capabilities because
it broke you.
Yeah, I'm broken by this. I love Asian culture so much. I love the show so much, and it just like destroyed me.
Yeah, we talked about when we were talking about adaptations how it's always going to be kind of a feelingsy thing because, you know, you look at this media and there are things that are really important to you about that piece of media. Somebody else looks at it and they pull out what they think is important. And sometimes what you think is important and what the adaptation doesn't match. And like everything that I thought was important about the source material was stripped of the movie. And so it's even difficult for me to talk about like, how do you fix this? Like, how do you make this an action adventure story when I so much think that the original was a character study? Like even things like, you know, backgrounding Katara and Sokka, that is a very valid point. And even like stripping it out and just making it Aang and Zuko's story, that's true. But I don't know, it's so difficult for me to think in those terms because that's so the opposite of what the ensemble character story of the original really is. And if it were just an action adventure story about, you know, Air Guy and Fire Guy, would I still be interested in that story? I don't know that I would.
That suggestion of like backgrounding them a little bit, you still can make it like a character study, but it is like focusing on the character study of Aang and Zuko is sort of what I was getting at with that, is that like you don't have as much time to delve into all of the characters, like, you know, inherently this was 20 episodes condensed into this one movie. Mm-hmm. And so like, if you're collapsing it, that's more what I mean, but like still trying to get at like a character study version. But yeah, I agree. It is inherently difficult to say, you know, how do you, like, what do you get rid of and whatnot. And I don't know. I feel like I just don't feel like they thought about it. Like I feel like there was a lot of like cool, flashy, fun visual tricks that they wanted to do and they did them. And then out came this vomit mess of a movie. Mm-hmm.
And I think part of the problem, I say that as if we haven't been talking about the problems this whole time. Avatar: The Last Airbender is so well suited to be a cartoon. Like visually, it is really, really interesting in an animated style. It allowed for the world building. It allowed for the effects of bending and the stunts of Aang flying and the cartoonishness humor that made the story a lot lighter. And it allowed for like the exaggerated childishness, and that played off in a good way within the context of a cartoon. And I think that was a major failing of this adaptation, was the fact that they took a story that was told as a cartoon and designed for a multiple episode arc and just tried to like squish it into a movie, and they didn't think about the medium at all that they were telling the story in. So you can't have the same kind of comedic levity and slapsticky jokes and snot jokes and stuff in the movie version. You can't have bending look exactly the same. You can't have, I don't know, depending on what you want to do with the stunts. You could have Aang sit on an air ball and like cross-legged and swing around through the air. But like they chose not to do that in the movie, but they didn't like do anything unique with airbending or waterbending or firebending that was particularly suited for a movie. They just tried to like copy and paste the stuff from the show and make it look realistic instead. And so I feel like I don't even know how you'd begin to fix it, but it would start with a more critical look at what elements you want to pull from the show. Do you want to pull the character growth? Do you want to pull the Chosen One story? Do you want to pull the idea that all these elements are connected to emotions within people, which is a really, really interesting thing. The fact that you have to be emotionally prepared and like look within yourself to be able to manipulate the environment around you. And like figure out how to encapsulate that in a live action story instead of a cartoon. And it didn't feel like they considered the difference between mediums to me.
Yeah. Mostly it makes me feel like they just shouldn't have done it.
Just
don't.
And maybe that's the answer.
Yeah.
Is like, this is a story that is meant to stay in the medium that it was designed to be in. Like there's a reason why it was a cartoon.
I was going to ask if in the year of our Lord 2018, it was announced that there would be some other, try at an adaptation of Avatar: The Last Airbender. Would you be excited or not?
Everything that Sari just said makes me think not. Like hearing Sari describe it, I'm like, yeah, you're right. Like everything about this story was designed very effectively for its medium and with that, like targeted at that audience. And I feel like making it live action, I don't think that a lot of the childishness works as well if you make it live action. And if you take away a lot of the like childishness. Like I mentioned in the episode that we did on the show that, like, for example, lots more people should have died, for example. And like, I think that worked just fine in the space of a cartoon. I don't think it would work as well in a live action. And so then that also like makes the whole thing a lot darker. And like, I don't know, if you make it a lot darker, it starts to become a very, very different story entirely. And it makes me feel like don't do it. Would be my reaction.
I don't want it.
I don't want it.
Yeah.
I don't want it.
No.
You hear that, movie people?
I have the complete series on DVD. I'm good. Please don't.
Yeah. I agree. I think that's a really great question, Mari, because I don't think... in the previous episode, I also talked about Teen Titans and it giving me similar vibes. There were some leaked photos of a live action Teen Titans adaptation of like Beast Boy and Raven and Starfire. And my first reaction was, oh no, like what did they do to my babies? Like this is meant to be comics or animated. That's what makes them so cool. And there might be a way, superheroes are big right now, so there might be a way to adapt it, but this is not it. And so I feel like until someone shows me a really, really compelling way to adapt some of these goofier kid stories in a non-animated way, then I don't want them. Yeah. I don't want you to ruin them. I don't want you to pour like time and money into making a sad thing.
Go do something else.
Yeah. There's so many other things. Yeah. Make up a story. If you like elements and bending, maybe just like create a story around that. Build your own world, M. Night Shyamalan. Don't steal from this one and bastardize it.
Yeah. I mean, you could even, if you want to tell a like dark story set in this world, right? Like you go backwards. You go before like the Avatar is found. Like you can tell like the live action version of like the Fire Nation taking over, like that you could do and like have that like whatever. that's fine. That can be its thing.
Have your war movie.
Yeah, have your war movie, basically, and with all the wild bending, whatever. But not this. Not this. Don't do this one.
Not our precious babies. Yeah.
Not our precious babies.
Stay away.
Leave them in their precious animated form. I'm good. Mm-hmm. And with that, I think we're good with this episode of the podcast. I think we have all had our media therapy, got our feelings out, and we're ready to move on. Sarah and I can finally leave this basement. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
If you want to do a little media therapy with us, you can let us know your feelings about The Last Airbender and about this episode of the podcast over on SnarkSquad.com, or you can find us on Twitter at Snark_squad. I am at Sweeney Says.
You can find me at My Name is Marines.
I'm at C.E. Riley.
And if you enjoyed this episode of the podcast, if you enjoyed the podcast in general, please leave us a review and a rating on Apple Podcasts. And thank you to Sari for joining us again this week. And thank you to Stefan Shin for our fancy theme music that is playing us out right now. And thank you to all of you for listening. We will be back again next week. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.